and a huge warm welcome to my guest today, Kylie Melville, who I'm really excited to chat to about multisensory environments. But first, before we get into our chat, let me just tell you a little bit more about our guest. Kylie is a PhD candidate supervised cross-institutionally between the University of Edinburgh and the University of Birmingham, funded by the Scottish Graduate School of Social Sciences. Her research explores school staff and neurodivergent students' experiences with multisensory environments using mixed and participatory research methods. Kylie's research is supported by a lived experience advisory group to ensure that the project is aligned with neurodivergent and education community priorities. Prior to her PhD, she worked as a special educational needs educator in England for the past 8 years in public and private education and the third sector, specialising in working with autistic children and young people with co-occurring ADHD, dyslexia, socio-emotional mental health needs, learning disabilities, speech and language needs, and Down syndrome. Her experience of teaching neurodivergent students and her lived experience as a relative and friend to neurodivergent individuals motivates her passion in conducting research with and for neurodivergent communities. There is so much wonderful work going on here, Kylie, that you're doing, so I cannot wait to get stuck into it. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Kylie to the podcast today. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you for having me today.
Not at all. I think there are so many things that I'd love to dig into here within the next hour with you, but we'll see how we get on. And I'm sure that if there is more to share, there will be other opportunities to have you back on at a later date to dig deeper into this, especially if anyone listening has any questions after listening today. But just to start us off, can you tell us a little bit about your journey, kind of from working in SEND education, beginning your PhD, and what drew you specifically to looking at the multisensory environment?
Yeah, sure. So I started working in SEND education when I was 19. It's hard to keep track. So I just moved to London to start my bachelor's degree at UCL. And because I'm a musician, I joined the Music Society. And the job bulletin was actually advertising for a part-time assistant role for an academic in Cambridge, and she was looking for someone to help her child commute from King's Cross to the University of Roehampton. The child was a blind piano student, and my job was to help him get on and off the train, take him to the bathroom with assistive equipment, sit in on his music lessons, and also provide feedback to his family and the au pair on how the sessions were going. And I don't consider myself a very good pianist, I'll let you know, but this child at just the age of 5 was playing Mozart sonatas purely through muscle memory and touch. And just knowing that I was able to help support this child access music, which I know brought him so much joy, this moment really sparked my passion. I knew from that moment on that I wanted to dedicate my career to working with and helping people who experience the world around them differently to how I do. So since then, I've worked in education and applied psychology roles in schools, privately in homes, and in charities across London and the Southeast. And I've also worked in a residential care setting in Lebanon for adults with pervasive and multiple learning disabilities. And I've also taught English abroad in Japan. And I think all of these experiences, what my parents like to call working on the front lines, I guess, culminated to me wanting to pursue my PhD in developmental and educational psychology. But what drew me specifically to research multisensory environments was a situation that I personally had to navigate when I was working in schools. So I had to design a sensory room in 4 days with a £200 Amazon voucher.
No way.
Yeah.
How did that go?
I managed it. I had some help from my colleagues. So we were able to repaint the room. We were able to get some nice fidgets, such as this one that I'm holding, like a poppet. And I think for the time being, it did a good job at fulfilling the needs of our students, because I was based in the primary wing of the school. But what I found really challenging was that I realized that there aren't a lot of, I couldn't find any evidence-based guidelines to follow in terms of how to design a school-based sensory room in particular. So all the ideas from myself and my colleagues was purely based on what we knew about our students.
Mm,
And we just tried to do our best. But because of the short time scale that we had to deliver, we actually didn't have time to consult our students about the space. And so this space sadly did fall into disuse and disrepair quite soon after. And that whole experience just made me think that I can't be the only educator feeling confused and frustrated, because I know now through my research that these spaces, these environments, they're being rapidly and widely installed in schools all across the UK, across all kinds of provision. And yet we don't have the research to back up all of the choices that are being made
yeah.
about these spaces. So I decided that this would be the topic of the PhD, and I wanted to make sure that my research would also include a lived experience from the outset, or as early on in the research process as I could, because I just want it to have a positive impact for the school community. And I guess I'll just end this blurb by saying that I loved working in schools. Like, being an educator is like what I am definitely most passionate about. So leaving my students to pursue the PhD was very, very difficult. But
Oh,
I wanted to make sure that, leaving meant that I can help more students than just the ones in my solitary school. So I hope maybe someday, if I ever meet them again down the line,
oh.
I can just tell them that they are and always will be my motivation for doing this work in the first place. So, yeah.
That is really, really beautiful. And I think it makes a difference, doesn't it, when passion leads a project or passion leads a decision to go in a certain direction with your career. Because if you are, like you were, really passionately into the career that you're currently in, to take a slightly deviated turn to do something else to then better the good overall and for more people, is a really brave thing to do, because it's hard to find something to be passionate about and to enjoy going to work day in, day out. We work for many, many years throughout our life cycle, so doing something that you're passionate about is really important. But sadly not everyone finds that passion, so to find it and then actually say, I need to go and do something else right now, I can come back to this, I think is really brave. And I think that having that drive and passion on a topic behind you doing your research has no doubtedly meant that you've probably really enjoyed the process, but also the outcomes are going to be that much more powerful because it's been driven by that kind of want and need and passion behind it. So I love that story and that journey. And do you think you'll ever go back into teaching and doing, are you doing teaching at the moment?
I'm not doing teaching at the moment, but I've done like freelance workshops for parents of neurodivergent children, and I've
Okay.
given talks on sensory processing and sensory inclusion in schools with teachers in Scotland. I'm working part-time as the media and communications officer for the Salvis and Minder Research Centre based in Edinburgh, which specifically wants to showcase research to do with neurodiversity and neurodevelopment. So I guess I
Okay.
am still doing that kind of knowledge exchange and teaching
Yeah.
and educating. And I mean, I would love to continue in research if I can, because I find it really exciting, and, you're doing something different every day, which I really
Yeah.
enjoy. But I really do also miss that daily, consistent, I guess, nurturing of students. And I loved just being able to see their progress, like day after day, week after week.
Yeah.
And it's funny because initially when I applied for like further study, I thought I wanted to become like an educational psychologist, so doing like the training doctorate and all that. And then I applied twice, didn't get in twice.
Yes.
But I realized in applying twice that, well, actually, educational psychologists are brilliant and they are very much needed in like our society and to support the students. But at the same time, they don't have that same consistent presence in the students' lives. And that's something that I really enjoyed. And I really wanted to be there to see the moments, the little victories, help them through the setbacks, like just
Yeah.
being there. And so I've discovered that actually doing a research, like a PhD, but then also making sure that my teaching experience, my time in education is reflected in it. And then also just bringing in more people into the fold. So connecting with more schools, networking with more educators and educational researchers. I think this means I can still be in the thick of it, even though I'm not working in schools at the moment, but I'm still like connected and I can still support where I can.
Yeah, I love that as well, because it does sometimes take you going through certain processes to realize what it is that you don't want, isn't it? And it's like, I wish our young people had more chance to do this. This is something that I really, it makes me sad that young people nowadays are expected to know their career trajectory straight away, and what do you want to be when you grow up, and what do we need to go and study at university or college straight after school, and and this is you for the rest of it. And it makes me really sad, because at 17, 18, 19, 20 even, like, you don't necessarily know what you want to do. I certainly didn't. I didn't come into what I'm doing now until I was in my 30s. It's not something that comes straight away naturally to everybody. And I think there's a lot to be said for going through that process of trying different things and then being able to pick out and go, I love this aspect of this role, but actually that isn't quite right for me because I don't want X, Y, and Z. So let's try this. Okay, I love these bits about this, but it's still not quite right. And that process that you went through, and it's funny you say educational psychologist, because I did exactly the same thing. I was convinced that I wanted to be an educational psychologist. And I mean, even now I find it an absolutely fascinating role. And who knows what will happen in the future. And I have the absolute pleasure of speaking to educational psychologists as well quite frequently, and hearing about the things that they're doing. And as you quite rightly say, like, they are incredibly valuable to society. And I did the same thing. But for me, when it comes to educational psychology, I think the emotion side of things as well, I think I would struggle with. I'm quite an emotive person. So kind of bringing in the psychology element for that, I think I would struggle on that front. But yeah, I love that kind of process of going through and finding the right thing for you. And I kind of wish our young people had more experience doing that. I just touch upon this term multisensory environment, because I think that a lot of people, especially people that are not kind of involved in this field, they often picture a multisensory environment, oh, it's a sensory room. And I reckon a lot of the time that is very much what it is. But in your research and what you've found, what does the term actually mean, and what can it look like to be a multisensory environment?
Yeah, so that was one of the first questions I had to figure out in my literature review last year. And there's so many different terms that are being thrown around. So I think sensory rooms is quite a common one. But you also have sensory adaptive environments, snuzzling rooms, air sensory rooms. And I think I decided to go with the term multisensory environment because just through reading, but also just like working in schools, like not all multisensory environments are bound by the boundaries of indoor built architecture. So a sensory garden or a therapy garden can also be considered a multisensory environment because it can have aspects of scent and taste and touch and all those different aspects. And also just being outdoors is a multisensory experience in and of itself. And I guess when it comes to what the spaces should look like and what they should be for, the existing research at least suggests that multisensory environment should have resources inside or outside, if it's outside, that can stimulate but also soothe the user. So it can allow the user to have passive or active sensory input. And if it's a sensory room, like inside a school building, for example, the items inside should be robust and easy to clean and easy to put back together if they fall apart or if they break. And there is a checklist of materials and items that have been developed by a research team led by a guy named Cameron in 2020, but this list hasn't been validated for school-based multisensory environments specifically. It's been used to inform the design of community-based ones, and it does have items that you would probably find in most school sensory rooms, like lava lamps, water features, adjustable lighting, and soft furnishings like bean bags. So it does try to encapsulate every item that could be inside. And this framework has been very useful for me when I'm like engaging with schools and asking school staff, because it's just a neat and easier, quicker way for them to easily identify what's inside. But in terms of the purpose, this is where it gets kind of tricky, because now the multisensory environment is being as something that needs to be all things for all people. So activities inside need to be stimulating, but it also needs to be a breakout space for leisure, but it also needs to be a space for learning. And the existing research doesn't identify how to manage and regulate these spaces in terms of how frequently you should use them, how long to use them, and very real challenges that happen in schools. What happens when, excuse me, what happens when more than one student wants to use the space at the same time?
Right.
Which is a very common challenge that I experienced, but also speaking to staff, it's one of the main challenges in using these spaces.
I guess you don't really think of it like that, do you? In the sense of when you said it has to be stimulating but soothing, like that in itself is really hard, I imagine, to achieve, because they're like polar opposite ends of the scale. And that comment you said about, you know, it has to be everything for everyone. And I mean, we know in life you can't please everyone, and it's really hard to design something that meets the needs of such a vastly wide range of different types of needs, especially when it comes to neurodivergency and things like that. So I imagine that this is not an easy task to achieve, and this is probably why there isn't a huge amount of research or tools, as you say, like checklists that are suitable for different types of environment. I imagine that's probably why, because that's a huge ask to find something like one space that fits all the different needs, but it's also stimulating but soothing at the same time, and that there's learning happening in there. And you know, it sounds crazy when you break it apart like that. Is it achievable?
I think at the moment, at least in research, they actually don't recommend that we conduct systematic reviews that try to find a common way to do it, because the variability, as you rightly expressed, it's just too much. Like there's too much difference between what these spaces look like from school to school, region to region. So I think what is possible, though, is that we can identify perhaps what best practice looks like. So what kinds of training would staff like most likely and most widely benefit from? What are some key items that seem to appeal to the widest variety of students and all the conditions that they may have? And maybe not trying to make it look a certain way. I think it more matters like how it's used, because I think a room can look like fantastic. It can have the most like high-tech, expensive resources in there. But if you don't know how to use them, it's kind of not only is it just a wasted investment, but I think it's a waste of opportunity for what the space could be. And especially, you know, we need to put the students' perspectives at the forefront, as well as the staff that support them, because they will be the primary users of this space.
Yeah.
So very much asking them, and, you know, this could be just done for isolated school communities, or each school can be a case study of its own, but just thinking about what would most benefit your community in terms of what this space looks like, but most importantly, how is it used and how does it complement your school's existing ethos of inclusive practice and supporting your students. So I think that is possible. I think right now the evidence base is there just isn't enough research yet to come up with a universal guide to like, this is what a multisensory environment looks like. I think this kind of research will need to be going on for a long while yet. I mean, if I can find funding for a postdoc to continue this work, I would love to. But we'll see.
Just a little shout out there to anyone listening who might be interested. But this is what I love about research, and this is why research really embeds everything that I do in my employed job at the university, in the role that I play when I founded Recap. Research is so important, and it's not a kind of quick answer and then there's your answer. Like, it's continuously evolving, it's continuously developing. There's always new information, there's always new data, you know, and especially, and we'll come on to talk about the whole kind of lived experience group and participatory element of your research, because that is so important, because bringing on different individuals into research as well gives so much different perspective, that it can take a research project that you have that you think you understand and you think you know what direction it goes in, and you bring in this individual and they completely make you go in a completely different direction, a better direction, because of that lived experience that they bring on. So this is what I love about research, that it is, you know, people that work in this field usually are very passionate about making a difference, and making a difference doesn't just have that end, like hard end finish, does it? Oh, I've done this project, these are the answers, and that's it for now. Like, it's continuously growing. So it's lovely to hear that you are still very passionate about this, and you do want to continue feeding into a very under researched area, from what it sounds like. So that's really, really exciting. Before we move on and talk about the whole lived experience side of things, just still sticking with the multisensory environment, why is it important for neurodivergent students or students with additional needs? Why is it important for them to have a space like this? Like, what do the rooms do to benefit them?
Yeah, that's one of the core questions that I hope I'll have a more definitive answer to once I've completed the next phase of the research, because I'll be going into schools and engaging with the students themselves and just find out, like, what does this space provide for you? What is the most meaningful aspect of this space to you? But I guess I can speak from just my experience in, like, using the space with my own students in the past, is that I think a really good benefit of these spaces for these students in particular is that it provides the opportunity to communicate your needs in very different ways. So the fact that it can be passive, it can be active. If your students are non-speaking, they can just gravitate towards a space or an item that means a lot to them and, like, can help soothe them or regulate through whatever they're experiencing. And I think the space as well can just be a safe space, a respite space from the overwhelm of the wider school environment. It can help with burning out. And I think it can also help students feel like they're still included in their school community, because otherwise they may feel excluded if, from a sensory perspective, they feel like they can't access parts of the school for whatever reason. So just in my personal experience, I had students who found, like, the cafeteria at lunchtime, it was way too scary for them because of all the different smells, all the different noises, and just the number of people. Like, it's too much for them. So, you know, they would want to go to the sensory room instead. They couldn't bring food inside, but it was more just like they can go in there, they can regulate, and then when the lunch cafeteria is less full, then they can go in. And, you know, obviously making sure that their needs of being fed and safeguarding is all met. But, you know, just knowing that there is a space that these students can have that isn't a classroom, and maybe it may have negative connotations for them if they're like in a classroom. But again, I think that's why I think we need to learn more about what are the purposes of these spaces, because again, we don't want to see it as, you know, this magic room where we just put kids inside and boom, like everything's fine. Like, no, it's very much like thinking about how we can use the space to complement the good work, the good practice that's already being done. And I mean, I know firsthand just how passionate and hardworking school staff are. As a former one myself, like, all we care about is making sure our students feel safe and empowered, and that they can leave school in better off shape than they were before they went to school, and they're ready for the rest of their life and the rest of the wider world. But I mean, it's not, I think wider society doesn't make it easy for school staff to do that job properly. But I think this space has so much potential, and especially for students who may communicate in different ways. You know, it's just a way for them to express what they need to the staff that support them. And also, like, if the child and the student leads the process, so like the student decides what happens in this space, having the control, having that choice is very empowering. So I think it really does help just students feel more safe in schools. I think that was a tangent. Sorry.
No, I don't think it was. I think it really helped to explain and you know, we have to take into context where you are in your research and that you've still got so much more to find out from your research as you go on. So again, as I said, like research evolves and develops consistently. So, you know, from where you are at the moment, this is what we're finding. But actually, you know, I might talk to you a year down the line and your answer might be slightly different or a bit more in depth or a bit more focused. Have you come across at all in your research so far any sort of assumptions from adults about sensory support or what sensory spaces need to look like that don't quite match up either with the research that you're reading or the young people that you are speaking to? Is there anything coming out like that at the moment?
Yeah, I think a lot of research done in the early 2000s, they kind of perceived the multisensory environment as a space to it's definitely not aligned with the neuroaffirming paradigm. Like research done back then definitely wasn't. So their main focus was to figure out how to use the space to actually reduce or extinguish behaviors that were deemed
Right.
quote unquote non-social or not pro-social. So very much medical model disability perspective of neurodivergent individuals. And that's clearly not the case of what's happening in most schools. Like most schools want to use the space, and the adults that are regulating the space, they want to use the space to support the emotional well-being and behavior of students. So like the multisensory environment historically has that very, I think, problematic origin. But I think there is progress being made to actually see this space as an affirming space so students can actually get the support that they need. You know, they say what they need and they can get it through this space. But I think one thing that we still need to really think about, especially in the future when we're developing more, I guess, like concrete guidelines or the evidence base, is to also recognize that not every student will want to use this space, right? Because every student will, like, you know, giving them that choice of whether they want to use the space is very important. One of my lived experience advisory group members, he, like, when he was in school, you know, he kept being told, you need to go to this room to calm down. Like, this is where you need to go. But he was saying to me, like, but I hated that space. I hated the lighting. I hated the color of the walls, like the things inside. Like, I did not feel like that was where I could feel better in school. So I think we have to avoid going to that extreme of, okay, so like this is the space where you have to go. No, we need to give that choice, that flexibility. And I think when these spaces were first being used, at least the first recorded like research is from the 1970s, you know, it talked about being user led, and that meant deciding when it is used, what happens inside. But I think, and this is like to no school staff's fault, but like I think just the wider societal expectations of what a school is, it's a place to learn, achieve on assessments. So like we're conflating this idea of we need to achieve. And what does that mean to achieve? Does it mean we need to get higher test scores? Does it mean we need to get 100% attendance for every child in the whole school? Like, this is why like the multisensory environment's purpose is still so fluid. Because if we purely see it as a space to empower and support the students' socio-emotional well-being, then we wouldn't even be thinking about, okay, we need to have a session in here to achieve a learning outcome, right? So it's this conflation of like, well, what is it for? But most importantly, we should be thinking about, what do the students get out of it? And I know it's really hard and maybe not always possible to embed student voice at every stage because schools are so busy and there's so much happening, and it's impossible to predict what kind of day you'll have in a school. So that unpredictability can make it quite challenging. But I think if we don't take these things into consideration, then we run the very high risk of having these situations where I think in the news a couple months ago, there was a BBC news report about, you know, schools being like using these spaces as like punishment and isolation spaces for students.
Right.
And it's just not only it's just like very, upsetting to read, but just knowing that, these students like think school is a safe place, is a good place to be. But then going through experiences like that can completely traumatize like them and make them not want to access school at all. So like we have a really strong duty to really, really think about like what does each space mean? How can we make sure that these spaces are being used? And I think there is a right way to use these spaces. It's definitely not what was being used like for isolation and punishment. Like absolutely not. Like we cannot be doing that. So yeah, I don't know where I went with that. Sorry.
I think you're so right though, and I think you don't want to create that negative connotation with a room that is supposed to be there to soothe, support a young person. And it's so interesting what you said about that young person that said, I don't find that room comforting. Like, I don't like the color of the walls. The lighting is too much. Like, this is why I suspect it is so important to get that feeding from the young people, and why kind of having lived experience young people involved in the kind of design and the input on the room, because actually what we might expect is soothing may not be another person's experience of something that's soothing. And again, like we touched upon this earlier, it's difficult to meet all the needs of all the people. But if it's something that can be adapted, then fantastic. If it's not, then as you say, that room shouldn't be forced to be used to have that calming, soothing effect. And that young person, we need to identify another way that that young person can decompress and come down from any sort of challenges that they have. So I think the more you kind of speak about it, and the more that we talk about, learner agency and lived experience feed into things and that, the more we can kind of see actually it's really, really important to get it right, to have that. And as you've said, your research is very much along that thread of having the lived experience advisory group, and it's very participatory. What does the lived experience advisory group look like? What is it? How do you use it? I think you said to me previously as well, you are recruiting at the moment. So what does that look like for your research?
Yeah, so my advisory group at the moment, it's comprised of 5 neurodivergent adults. One adult is the carer of one of the members, and they use a variety of ways to communicate, and they have a variety of different diagnostic or self-diagnosed labels. And essentially, they work in partnership with me to make sure that every output, every step of the way, that the community voice is there. And I didn't want to do a project like this without it. My supervisors have been amazing at supporting me and guiding me on how to create the group, how to keep it running, when should I be having the meetings, because there are opportune moments throughout the research cycle where, I can't proceed if I don't know, because I could be missing something. I could have an assumption or a bias that I have not thought about, and I need them there to like cross-check and really really challenge me in a good way to be thinking about. I may not be thinking about everything. And even though like I have experience as an educator and I come from a mixed neurotype family, and I come from a social community that has a lot of neurodivergent people in it, I still am not like part of that. I'm an ally, fierce ally. But again, I don't have that lived embodied experience of what it means to be neurodivergent. And I really am so grateful for the advisory group, but just everyone along the way who has like challenged me or been very supportive and encouraging about the work. And just to know that it really means something and that they're really passionate about it too. Like that makes me feel like, okay, I'm on the right track. There's still so much I need to learn, but I'm on the right track. And I guess the point about wanting to recruit a couple more members, because I'll be going into schools, I would really like to see if I can find 1 or 2 children or young people that can join my group to help advise on what it's like to be neurodivergent in schools today, and if you're using these spaces in schools currently, I think this current day-to-day experience would be very helpful in making me make sure that I'm not missing anything. So yeah, I guess if anyone's listening and you know a young person or you are a young person that would be interested, I can share my email at the end, or I can send it to you, Lucy. And yeah, please get in touch, because I just want to make sure I'm not leaving any voice or perspective out of the conversation. And I guess I'll just finish this point by saying that as a PhD student, I know there are some limitations that I can't overcome, like the amount of time that I have to complete the PhD, because I'm being funded by like a funding body. There's a strict deadline for when I need to get done, and I need to show what I've completed each year. But I'm trying my best not to let that hinder the process the participatory research takes, because I'm doing this, I want to do it right. I don't want to rush it. I don't want anything to be tokenistic. I really want to make sure that, to the best of my ability in the current stage of my career right now, that I'm doing it as best as I can. So that's the goal.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's wonderful to hear that you are trying to bring in the voices of young people within that kind of school environment, because, as you say, who knows what that feels like better than people currently experiencing it. So I agree. I think that their voices would be incredibly valuable to a project like this. And yeah, so I'll share details underneath the episode for anyone who wants to get into contact with you, just to find out a bit more information. No pressure to, agree to anything, but if they want to contact you, find out the information, what's required of them and their young people, and then, who knows where it will go from there. But I love the fact that you have this group feeding into it, and every step along the way. I mean, how early does the group get involved in research like this? Like, there must be an element of time where you have to recruit the group. So I guess when you start the project, you already have your initial ideas, but do they help to frame it right from the beginning, or do they come in partway through? I mean, how does that process work?
Yeah, I think ideally with participatory action research specifically, which is the model I'm trying to follow, ideally lived experience would have come from the very beginning, and I would have been able to engage with community researchers or members of the community before I even came to Edinburgh and started my PhD. But because, again, to have gotten the funding, I needed to have a skeleton or a foundation of an idea. That was the only way I could have gotten the funding. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to get it embedded from the very, very start. But I recruited members for the group soon after I got ethical approval for my first study. And our first group meeting was talking about, so what do you want to get out of this experience? How can I support you with it? Do you want to learn more about research and just like how it works and what a research process looks like? And also talking about compensation, because as lived experts, they rightly need to be compensated for their time. And I think, Edinburgh, I haven't encountered any issues, but I have heard stories where when it comes to PhD researchers working with lived expertise and lived experience advisory groups, the idea of compensation is very finicky. So, do we pay them outright? Do we give them vouchers? Like, what does compensation look like? So that was something I had to think about from an ethics perspective as well. I realized, I even held bias around compensation. I just assumed that, oh yeah, like monetary or voucher compensation is, what they would want. But actually one of my members said, actually two of my members now, they said, oh no, I don't want to be paid. I just want to help. I just want to give my perspective. And I was like, wow, like it's unintentional, but I do hold so much bias, and I need to be challenged on them. So this whole experience has been like very, very eye-opening, and like I think I'm thriving off what I'm learning from this experience. And like thankfully as well, like the group members have expressed they're also like really enjoying this experience, and they like the meetings. They like being able to give their perspective and know that I take it seriously and that it is making genuine changes and shaping how the research is going to be shared with the community in journals, at conferences. So no, it's been a really powerful experience. And I think some PhD students may feel reluctant to go down this path because it does take a lot of time. It does take a lot of planning and coordination. And, it may feel like, oh no, it's unnecessary because I just need to write, I just need to read. But no, like this is so important. And yeah, again, as you said earlier, like it is changing what I thought this project would look like. Like it's very different now to what I thought it would look like, but in the best possible ways. So yeah, to anyone listening, if you're considering working with a lived experience advisory group, it's fantastic. And just knowing that you can give back, you're not just taking, like you're giving something back is also very important. And then, rightly so, neurodivergent community members may feel reluctant to engage in research nowadays because historically, and sadly still today in some cases, they just keep, giving so much, but they're not getting anything back. And the things that they're telling researchers and wider society of what they need to flourish and be happy and supported in life, it's not being taken into account. It's just the same cycle of exploitation and discrimination. Like it just never seems to end. But I'm learning so much just about like the resilience and the compassion that this community has, and I'm very, very grateful that these members have shared so much with me, and I hope I'm doing it all justice with my work in the end. I have this terrifying anxiety that it's not gonna live up to what it could be, but at the same time I know it's just part of doing research. It never ends. Like it just keeps going. So,
yeah. And I guess having them embedded so deeply in the research that if they feel that you are not taking it seriously or it's not going, how to plan or anything like that, I'm sure they'll tell you. And definitely, that's the beauty of having them not just kind of, we're going to consult with them at the beginning and then we might have a chat with them in the middle and then at the end we'll show them what we've got. Like the fact that it's so periodically embedded throughout the process, and you're repeatedly going back and repeatedly sharing back with them and they're able to feed in consistently. I think that enables it to not be a case of getting to the end and realizing actually we didn't do that justice, because it can be tweaked along the way to the needs. And I guess that really helps it not being tokenistic and not just being, yes, tick that box, we've spoken to neurodivergent people about this and they've said this. Actually they've really fed into it. And I think that's really, really important. And the value of lived experience, like you've described it beautifully there, and it's a reason why I felt so strongly that the things that I do with Recap, yes, it's very much embedded with research. Yes, it's very much about the credibility of the individuals feeding into the content of Recap and, having the credentials behind them. But actually, it was really important for me to have a strand that was very much about those with lived experience. You don't have to have a PhD, you don't have to have a master's or a degree, or a certificate in this particular area. If you're living it, I want to hear from you, because you're going to have a different perspective to a researcher researching in that field, and I want to bring all of the perspectives in. And so it was always important to me from the beginning that yes, I want the professionals, yes, I need the experts and the academics that are working in this way, but actually I also want the people living it, because it really helps to provide that full perspective of actually what the literature is saying, what the researchers are finding, and how the people are actually finding it themselves. So I think that's why I'm particularly loving what you're doing, because it's kind of embodying that but within the research process, and I really love to hear that. And I think with my field that I work in around home education, I find that can be really challenging, getting the involvement of the home educating community, because rightly so, they can be a little reserved sometimes when speaking to researchers. They're not always represented in the best way in media, in government and policy, and other researchers. So it took a long time for me to demonstrate to the community, this is what I'm doing with your information, this is how you're feeding into it, these are the outputs that come in, this is how I'm representing you, to build that trust to then allow them to feed in more and more. So I think it's so important that things don't become so academic that it is only from academia that we're finding things out from. We need to balance it. But the key for me is that transparency of, this is where the information is coming from. I'm not claiming that this information is robust, peer-reviewed research, but actually it's just as important, but you just need to know that this is a lived experience. So, I mean, huge clap for you for what you're doing with your research. I think it's amazing. Thinking about designing sensory environments and what you've seen so far, I think we may have touched upon this a little bit previously, but are there things that you're seeing within schools or educational establishments that people are doing right when designing it, and things that they may be getting a little bit wrong when thinking about a multisensory environment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm just gonna say, like, I'm not the be all end all like expert of it, because I've only worked in like a certain number of schools and like different situations. But I think what schools do tend to get right is like choosing items that seem to have the most appeal to a wide variety of student groups. So autistic, ADHD, dyslexic, what have you. But I think it's really tricky to find, I guess, think about what are age appropriate activities to do in these spaces with those items. So a couple of times just working, but also doing school visits, like the items are there, the space is set, it's ready to go, and that's fantastic. And, some schools have, logs of like which students have used it, what items were used, being signed off. So just like knowing that there's a record, like that's fantastic. So you can keep track of, oh, maybe some activities aren't resonating as well. We can adapt as we go. So like that personalized approach for each student is fantastic. But then I guess if it's a big school that tries to cater for students of all different ages, all different developmental stages, and a wide variety of sensory preferences and needs, obviously this space isn't, it's not the magic box, as I said earlier. It can't do everything. But I think in the pressurized environment of like, oh no, like something needs to be done, sometimes I do think if the student comes in and all they want to do is just sit or lie down or roll on a peanut ball, that's something that's being done. It doesn't mean, they have to come in and do like certain activities or complete certain interventions. And they're like, just them coming in is a victory because they've been able to come into this space and get what they need from it. But I guess like it's hard because, all schools are very different. All school communities, there isn't one that's exactly the same. And you'll never meet a neurodivergent student that is exactly the same to another, right? So there's so much complexity, but I just have I have so much admiration for the school staff I've met so far. Like their passion is so strong. And it's that passion that like really like propels them forward, and like their desire to see their students like supported and well in school. It's really humbling to be like working alongside and just learning from them as well. And I guess it's also reaffirmed to me that, when I was working in schools, like I wasn't perfect. No member of staff is, but just hearing how their different experiences and what I'm seeing in schools is resonating with what I went through, what my colleagues went through. Like, it just goes to show that there is like a really strong evidence-rich base of lived experience that can really help establish, guidance and maybe training protocols for schools all across the UK. Everything is here. We just need to find a way to synthesize it and make it accessible for as many people as possible. And, if that means, instead of, doing a CPD thing, we make videos about it, or we do more podcasts about it, or, we have, this is maybe a pipe dream, but maybe for a postdoc, if I can find funding, I would love to develop like some sort of like CPD or pilot training program that then I can then share widely with schools. And obviously, like, the content would be co-produced with the schools themselves. So it wouldn't be coming out of nowhere, and it wouldn't be like foreign ideas or foreign concepts, because it would be coming from them. It's just a way of being able to organize it in a way that they could find most beneficial in using in everyday practice.
I mean, that sounds great. And I think education is key, isn't it? And it is, yes, we can provide money, we could provide resources, we could provide a space for people to create a multisensory environment, but without the knowledge behind how to create it, without the support, without the research and the lived experience feeding into how to do it, it's not, that's when I think we risk it being tokenistic, because yes, we've got a room, yes, we've put some stuff in it, now we're going to call it our sensory room or our multisensory room or what have you. But actually, without and I think you touched upon this earlier, without the correct use of the room, then it becomes just another tick box exercise. So I think having the support, the education, the CPD, the training, and what have you, for me, on the outside of this research, I think that's the key element here. And I guess that's going to be a huge challenge for a lot of schools or educational environments at the moment, is not knowing what to do, not knowing how to implement things like that. And that's where you get the mismatch of young people not using the room because it's not quite right for what they need. So as you say, research is always growing and developing, and I think that this is just the beginning of a long line of research and trialing things, creating those training opportunities, CPD workshops, what have you, trialing them, what works, what doesn't, what needs tweaking, and going. And it, I don't know whether it becomes something that maybe there's a kind of a skeleton framework around it, and then it's down to the individual school to make that framework work for their particular context. And again, it's supporting those individuals in that school to use the bare bones of the framework to then make it work in their context. And not everybody, and this is another thing that, what I'm trying to do with Recap with research is, that there's a lot of research out there, but actually applying it into context, actually being able to take the research and the outcomes of the research and make it work in your context, whether that's in a school environment or whether you're a parent and you can see this information from this research, but actually, what does that look like in my home with my children? That process of transferring that knowledge and putting it into practice is really hard. And people are trained, researchers are trained to do that, and that's our job, to do that. But if you're a parent or a teacher that is on the ground, that's not something you necessarily have a lot of support in. So I think for me, I'd like to see a lot more support around actually taking the research and the information, and how do our teachers, practitioners, parents, families, caregivers, anyone who's working with children or neurodivergent young people, how do they do that? And how are they supported to do that? So I think that's really, really important. So I think we've touched upon this with what we've said, but, obviously we're becoming more and more aware of sensory environments and sensory informed practice. But there doesn't seem to be a lot of guidance out there, as you've said. How can schools use research like yours to make better informed decisions about their sensory environments and their sensory informed practice?
Yeah. So I think with the schools that I'm hoping to work with for the next phase of my PhD, I'm hoping that what comes out of the research process is that they can learn or be reminded of what they're already doing well and identify where some areas that they could improve on. But I think again, just the importance of lived experience and just actually going in there and seeing what's happening in the school itself, instead of being on the outside and just assuming what's happening, is that, schools and school staff, they're incredibly time and resource poor because they're working with less and less, it seems, and they're doing so much at all hours, all pistons firing every time, to try and keep their students as well and supported as possible. So I'm hoping that my research won't end up in by having these impractical implications of, oh, you need to invest like thousands and thousands of pounds to get this specific item. You need to make your space bigger, because schools need to work with what they got most of the time.
Yes,
So I'm
so
hoping
true.
that what comes out of this research will be actionable, small but effective changes that they can make, or even if it's just like an opportunity for knowledge exchange to like see all the parts that have been happening, but connecting the dots and having a holistic picture of, okay, so this is what our sensory environment is like. This is what it's been being used for. This is what our students are saying. This is what our staff that support them are saying that use the space as well. Now we have a foundation and we can work with this,
Hmm.
because I don't want my research like to firmly dictate what you need to do with this either, because per the participatory nature of this research, it evolves and it should align with what the community wants out of it, right? I
Hmm.
I don't want to go in with any ulterior motives and thinking like, okay, I'm hoping that my research will evolve in like a percentage increase in number of students that go in, or like a percentage increase in like this outcome. No, it's like I'm just here to help you like learn more about the research side of things, and I'm here to support you with suggestions on how we can apply what the research says and what your school community has shared with me. But ultimately, they would know best, right? Like
Hmm.
how to support their staff,
Absolutely.
how to support their students. And just knowing that they have created something that can support their community, I think it's also maybe an opportunity for staff and students to like maybe participate in something like this for the very first time. And if they get something out of this experience, maybe it can encourage them to think about, oh, we can do more projects like this within our community, or we can bring more people in, or maybe we can like visit other schools and see what they're doing and share best practice that way. It's just like sharing this knowledge as widely as possible. Um, and yeah, I think it's just about like, if I can help at least one staff member, one student, one school, then this would have all been worth it. And the
Yeah.
advisory group members that have been with me like along for it, if they can get something positive out of this and they can see the impact behind it as well, then I mean that's why I'm doing this research in the first place. It's to see this impact that can actually help them in real time, knowing what they have in the moment and just working with that. So yeah.
I love that. And I can feel your passion for this coming through the screen. Like, and it just makes me smile because that's so important when it comes to research, is having a genuine passion for what you're doing. Otherwise it becomes very surface. And I can feel that through every explanation that you give, every time you talk about it. And that it's so lovely to see. What surprised you most about your research so far? Has anything kind of made you go, oh, I wasn't expecting that? Aside from acknowledging some of your biases that you weren't aware of, which is great. I love that.
I don't know. I guess it may be my anxiety and imposter syndrome speaking, but like, I guess I was not expecting the amount of positive feedback I've gotten on my
Okay.
research. So going to conferences and workshops and, just sharing like what I've done so far and what I hope to do next, like just having practitioners and researchers from all different, regions of the UK and even internationally just telling me like, this is great. Like, you need to keep this up. Can you tell us what you find like at the very end and all that? And just it's been very, I don't know, I just feel really like excited and just grateful to be doing this work and knowing that all my years of working in education, I won't say is paid off, because like, like I loved it and it's something that I will hopefully return to. But just if if you told 19-year-old Kylie that this is what she would be doing with everything that she's learned, would not have believed you. I thought like, I thought like, oh, my capacity for impact will just be centered on where I'm working in this school, in this home, in this charity. But now just knowing that actually what I'm doing now can actually help a lot of people, in very different ways, in very different places. And I guess like one finding from like the study that I've just finished, which was a mixed methods online survey with school staff in England and Scotland, was that both staff in mainstream and special schools, they face similar challenges with practically using multisensory environments. And yet they all
Okay.
endorse across the board, they strongly endorse the space's ability to support student behavior and emotional well-being. So it did, again, it challenged my assumption that, oh,
Hmm.
mainstream and special schools will be very different. They're going to be showing very different expressions of what they think the purpose of the space is for. But actually, the overlap was incredibly, like, incredibly significant. So, yeah, just being reminded again that, yeah, like, it maybe provision type does have some differences in terms of practice and maybe the kinds of students that attend your school. But like if you're in a school in the first place, it means you're there to like support your students and educate
Yeah.
them, but supporting them is like the bottom line, right? So, I mean, and I've worked in both mainstream and special. So the fact that that surprised me also made me go, but why did I think it would be very
Yeah.
different? I don't know. So,
It's
yeah, but
crazy, isn't it? It's crazy how
yeah,
we assume our assumptions on how we would have assumptions that actually
yeah.
come plays out in practice. And I think that's the beauty of it, isn't it? Because you get so kind of wrapped up in your research. It's actually really lovely to have those
Mm,
moments where you kind of step back and go, oh, actually, that's challenged my thinking on
mm,
that, because I think
mm,
we can be guilty of getting so immersed in our
mm,
research that we kind of go, and again going back to what you're doing with the advisory group and things like that, like the importance of having someone regularly check you and say,
mm,
actually, before you go off on a tangent on this, which we're all guilty of, if you thought about X, Y, and Z, and bringing
yeah.
it back. So
Mm,
I think that's something that researchers often get surprised with their
mm,
own research, because it makes you kind of step outside of your own thinking and go, oh, hang on a
mm,
minute, I need to think about this, which is really hard to do, because
mm,
we're just naturally, as human beings, we have our thought processes and what we're doing. So I think that's a really hard thing to do. So it's nice that you get the opportunity to do that frequently throughout your study.
yeah, no, I really appreciate just every because I meet with my advisory group every 2 months, 2.5 months, and our group is it's big, but I can't meet all of them at the same time, because
Yeah.
they have lives, so there's logistical juggling. But every time I meet with them, either in groups or alone, like, it's just I I learned so much. Like I love being the learner again because I think as a PhD researcher, you're trained to become an academic expert in a very specific topic. And I think this experience has just reminded me again just how much I love learning. Like I loved school, like I loved being in education and I love working in education. So this experience just reminds me, yeah, like I'll never stop loving learning and
Yeah.
learning from members of the community is just so powerful. And I'm hoping that whatever like what I'm learning now, like I can carry with me for the rest of my academic career or just like in the next career choice that I make. So and also hoping that I can maintain these connections because again, I don't want to just sever that connection once my
Yeah.
PhD ends. Like I want to keep it going. And just knowing that if they in the future want to come to me with questions about research or, if they need support in any way, just knowing that I can be someone they know will be there to support them as well. Um, yeah, just I've been learning so much throughout this experience and it's been very humbling. It's been challenging in some ways, but ultimately it's just been so, yeah, inspiring. Yeah. I'm just really grateful for all the lessons I've been learning throughout this process. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. So, just to bring it to a close, what's one thing that you would like to think that listeners could take away from our conversation today? Maybe have some reflection time after listening to our conversation. What would you like them to take away from it?
I think if I can choose one thing, it would be that obviously schools are places of learning, but no student will be ready to learn if they don't feel safe first. And that includes feeling sensory safe and sensory included in their school environment, whether it's the classroom, the cafeteria, the multisensory environment. So it's just thinking about if educational researchers, they want to explore what can be done to support students in schools, then we need to go to the source. Like, we need to learn from the schools themselves, because they would know better than anyone what support looks like, what works for their students, what doesn't work for their students. And yeah, just try and embed and empower these voices in neurodiversity research. It has to be mandatory. It can't be seen as optional, because if we keep thinking about it in tokenistic ways, we're never actually going to deliver the positive impact that our research can have for these communities. Sensory safety and inclusion is very important. And yeah, lived experience is key. Like, for me, it's changed the trajectory of what my research would look like in many ways, but for the better, because now I know that my work will actually be more aligned with what these communities want. Yes. And I mean, at the end of the day, like, I think that's what being a researcher is about. It's about knowing that your work and your investigation, your exploration is making that impact. Yeah. So I guess that would be it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, I love it. Kylie, your work is so, so important. And I'm so pleased that we had the chance to have this conversation and that I could learn more from you, what you're doing and where you're going. And I can't wait to follow the journey, stay in contact and find out some of the outcomes of your research as the time goes on. I know we said that we would put information below about people contacting you if they wanted to get involved. But aside from that, are you online? Are you happy for people to reach out and just kind of say hi and follow your research and things like that? Are there other ways that people can follow you?
Yeah, of course. So they can find me on LinkedIn, or they can contact me at my email. I also write a blog just on WordPress about, questions I've been considering, like little anecdotes like that are making me think about the research process. And I'm hoping that my first study will be submitted to a journal very soon as well. Open access, of course.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah. So hopefully when that eventually comes out as well, I can share it with you, and I'll just share it on my networks and people can read about it there too. I've had such a fantastic time talking to you, and just talking to you has reminded me I love doing this work. So I would love to stay in touch and keep you all updated on how it goes. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you. Well, if you give me all of the links to all the things, especially the blog, I'd love to follow along with the blog as well. So absolutely. Give us all that information. I'll pop it under the episode so people can reach out, and we'll keep this conversation going. And I'd love to have you back on when you've got some bit further along in the research. Keep us updated and we can keep an eye on how it's going, because I think it's going to be incredibly valuable. So thank you so much for all of the hard work that you're doing within this space for this community, because I think it is going to be incredibly valuable to them as well. So thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Thank you for having me.